Uppermost in our minds then was, had the interview with Princess Diana, the decision that she made to be interviewed, been done fairly or not. That was absolutely uppermost in our mind. And the first investigation we did before Christmas under Tim Gardam talked to all people concerned and produced a letter where she said very, very clearly that she'd been shown no documents by Martin Bashir. She was not made aware of anything by Martin Bashir she didn't already know, and she had no regrets underlined by the interview. And it's quite interesting that Lord Dyson himself says that an interview of some sort would probably have taken place anyway. So at that point in our inquiries and our investigations, we came to an end. Tim Gardam, there was no case to answer.
Are you seriously saying with an interview that was granted to a junior reporter with the wife to the heir to the throne that nobody questioned how that happened? Did it not cross your mind?
I'm so sorry.
Did that not cross your mind, Lord Hall?
Yes, we asked about, of course, about how it had come about. But of course we did. But I go back. You trust the team of Tim Gardam as head of programmes for current affairs, the editorial policy controller, and Steve Hewlett, the editor, who is sadly no longer with us because he would have a lot to say about this, I am sure, to ensure that the interview was properly got and that it was also properly done, as indeed it was. I just make one other thing I just want to say on this as well. Lord Dyson is very, very clear in his report, quite high up in his report, that an interview would have happened anyway. Indeed, he mentions the fact that I think the Princess was going to meet with Nick Witchell at the end of August. That never took place because Steve Hewlett said, no, we're going to go down a route of Martin Bashir. So the context, now we know, was actually that an interview, according to Lord Dyson, was very, very likely. In this sense, Martin Bashir got it first.
Did it ring any alarm bells at all, Lord Burt?
No, absolutely none. I mean, I think you can overstate the junior. He's in his early 30s. He's worked in the BBC a number of years. He's worked on other current affairs programme. He's risen up the ranks to Panorama. What I did understand and is embedded in my memory is that he didn't. I mean, I think he probably did set out to get an interview with Princess Diana, but that's not the story that was being told. What he set out was to make a panorama on the surveillance of Princess Diana and the royal family. Not an unreasonable thing to do, because remember, in the previous couple of years, two private phone calls, one from Princess Diana, one from Prince Charles, had been intercepted and published. So it wasn't fanciful to assume that there were difficulties around surveillance and bugging of members of the royal family. And my understanding is that was the journey he set out on. Now, given what we now know about how he thinks and how he calculates, and given the skill with which he assembled the yarn that he took to Earl Spencer, I think we can be reasonably suspicious that he had that as his objective all along.
But you didn't think, why has Nick Whitlock got this?
No, absolutely not.
Okay,
why would one? You wouldn't stare a gift horse in the mouth. You're being told, just as Lord Hall said, he only knew a couple of weeks before. I knew even less time.
I am very surprised that you have no recollection of the event.
Well, I didn't say I had no recollection of events surrounding the interview, because you are quite right. This was an extremely important event in my life and that of everybody else concerned. And I have a reasonable recollection of those things where I myself was, so to speak, in the lead. And for instance, in discussion of the interview itself, whether I led the discussion about whether it was legitimate to do it, and if we did do it, what was reasonable to ask Princess Diana and what we shouldn't ask Princess Diana. I don't have a detailed understanding of that meeting, but I can remember the occasion, and I can remember some of the things I said, and I can clearly remember what I thought at the time. And I had to make a decision because Princess Diana she only imposed one condition, which was that she and only she should inform the Queen when the interview was done. And I had to think about that and agree. And I can clearly remember, because my main problem, it was, as has already been alluded to, I'd had an excellent relationship with the chairman of the BBC over the best part of 10 years, but it had deteriorated over the previous year. And he was, well, I don't particularly want to go into what had happened to him as the years went on and so on and so forth, but he became more and more difficult and unreasonable. And he had, and everybody knew it, very, very strong views about the royal family and things I would not repeat about his views about Princess Diana. So I had to, the hardest thing for me, and which I clearly remember, was having to decide what to do about that. And in the end, I decided he would be told essentially 7 days before transmission, but not before the interview, because I judged that if he were told, he would frustrate it, and that would have been wrong for the BBC. That was a very difficult decision for me, and in making it, one that I said to my wife at the time, I expected that I would lose my job on the back of it, but I thought it was the right decision. And I can remember clearly the events that followed that, because he made a great fuss at the board, and I had further meetings with members of the board, and in the end, they supported me.
Well, he's talking at the end there about the chairman, Marmaduke Hussey, who was married to the one of the Queen's chief ladies in waiting, and they had to be quite careful that the palace didn't get wind of this interview before it had actually been broadcast. So, which is, I mean, it's quite an important job to do as a journalist, is to make sure that, you know, because of the content of an interview, your managers do not have the ability to compromise what you're up to. Now, I don't think there'd be any chance whatsoever of this sort of thing going out today, which is a very sad thing for me as a former BBC journalist myself. And I can also tell you that back in around about, I think it would be 1996, I was at a meeting, it was a sort of little conference with Sean Kevill, the Newsnight editor, and some other BBC executives up at the Director General Suite in Broadcasting House, chatting with Richard Eyre and saying he was the head of news, I think, at the time, and saying to him, look, you know, the BBC seems to be losing its teeth. And he said, yeah, what about the Diana interview? See, we didn't lose our teeth then. I did have to sort of say, well, yeah, okay, fair enough, that was very good. Anyway, the point being, Ian, that this is now banned. The BBC are no longer allowed to show it under false pretences. Effectively, what we've heard in court is simply not the case. That all this stuff to do with Lord Spencer and Tiggy Leg Burke had actually nothing to do with saying that Diana was tricked into doing this interview, by nefarious means by the BBC. No, she did it quite willingly, and that seems to be pretty obvious, doesn't it?
Not having followed this to the extent I think you have, I'm going to sit back and just watch what I think is an embarrassing exercise of the BBC in destroying one of its own great reporters. But the BBC has a lot of things to answer for. Before we hear from Martin, let's also hear a little bit from the Royal Marine who was spying on Diana. So he might have been one of the people that Martin Bashir would have been spying on himself and filming, in the run up to her death. That is 3 years after that interview was filmed.
Well, personally, I don't think that it's affecting the lads at all. They're very mature, they're well trained. The father's really done a good job in sorting them out, and whatever their mother does is immaterial. But they're well ahead of the time. Of course they are. They're well trained in what they are. They're well trained for what they are. It makes no difference to them. They're mature at their age. They're well aware of their...
You've had experience of them. You've been... Hang on, please.
Don't forget, I know more about these kids than Diana than any of you.
How?
Because I was a bloke that spied on her. I was the one who was watching her, catching her out, doing things with Hewitt.
Who for?
No comment.
What do you mean, no comment? No one get away with that.
Doing it for other agencies. I was a Royal Marine. I was tasked to do something to find out what Diana was really up to.
So she's not paranoid then?
No, it's true.
No, she's not.
Oh, I see. So it is. So we were spying on her.
Of course we were.
That is an unnamed chap on Kilroy programme, which was, that was aired around the time of the death of Princess Diana. So it's quite clear that she was under surveillance. It seems pretty worrying that sort of thing didn't really come out at the time. Anyway, and in a way, a more important aspect of all this is now, today, which is we're going to hear now from a guy called Matt Chorley, and he does a programme on Times Radio called The Big Thing, where he talks here, and we've got another little clip. The last one on Diana you'll be pleased to hear, maybe. Well, it's not on Diana. This one's on Prince Charles, and the fact that we've now got suitcases full of cash coming into the country in order to fund Prince Charles's mansion, where is his little hideaway mansion, Argyle House, up in Scotland, and the Scottish police, investigating 2 of his charitable trusts up there.
He doesn't respect the constitutional convention, whereby even if he happens to have opinions, he doesn't act on them. I think this is probably the problem at the heart of it. For 3 decades, Charles has been lobbying and advocating for causes close to his heart, some of them perfectly laudable, like restoring a dilapidated, beautiful 18th century Palladian manor. Others probably a little less laudable, like lobbying for homeopathic treatments to be made available on the NHS. But in a way, it kind of does a disservice to the debate to focus only on the weird and wacky things that he lobbies for. I mean, I do think his Foundation for Integrated Health is probably the most notorious, but he's also lobbied against modern architecture, which he happens to dislike. But even if it's great stuff, it's the fact that he feels this entitlement to lobby and advocate on behalf of his causes. That's why he set up all these charities. I mean, it's not a normal thing. The Queen doesn't have, charities through which tens of millions pass and go on to causes close to her heart.
What she does is she's the patron of existing charities, and which sort of bestows support upon them, but you're not involved in the fundraising and the day-to-day running of them.
Exactly. It's funny, like, in the newsroom, we often reflect on the word charity, but the moment that you introduce that word into a piece of journalism, people think, oh, well, it must be good then. I mean, the charity is just a legal structure that allows people to do things in the world, to pursue objectives that the charity deems to be charitable. But the question is it right for Charles to be intervening in the world in this way? And I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? Is that by pursuing good things, he likes the environment, he likes, building houses for communities. Well, who could object to that? The point is that actually if you're observing the constitutional rule or the constitutional norm that you don't have an opinion on anything, then being for or against nice houses is not something that he should necessarily be sticking his oar into. Yeah, I mean, during the we only know this because of the Guardian's years-long legal case, but I mean, he lobbied new Labour ministers on everything from army helicopters to the Patagonian toothfish. I mean, he basically just has lots of big opinions, and he acts on them, and nowhere is his opinion about how the world ought to be more visible than in Dumfries. This is basically his Charles HQ. I mean, Clarence House is his London base, but in terms of where he goes to be at peace with the world, where he feels like his values are exhibited to visitors and to all those who pass through, I mean, Dumfries House is the place. So you're right to identify that this is kind of the blank canvas on which Charles has attempted to make an indelible impact. And actually, the fact that it's in Scotland is a long way from Westminster, and the prying eyes of the media. I mean, a lot of this stuff probably goes a bit under the radar. So let's go back to the story that you had then yesterday, Gabriel. Lord Brownlow spent £1.7 million bailing out Prince Charles' failed eco-village in Knockroon in Scotland. This is Professor Alan Dunlop. He's a leading Scottish architect who criticised the plan at the time. He spoke to Times Radio earlier about why he thought the scheme failed.
His heart was probably in the right place. I was first asked about Knockroon in 2010 and the creation of Scotland's Poundbury and whether I thought it would stack up. An analysis of Poundbury in Dorchester, which has a population of mostly professional classes, some 75,000 people, in comparison to Auchinleck and Cumnock, former mining villages whose industries, textile and engineering industries have gone, has a population of 16,000. So from that point of view, I couldn't quite see how the thing could stack up right from the very start. I'm not necessarily talking about the architecture of it and the design and the overall look of it, but just from a purely development point of view, I couldn't understand how you could possibly make it work.
So that's Matt Chorley's interviewing Gabriel Pogrund about Prince Charles's completely failed eco-village that he's been trying to build, and getting Lord Brownlow to bail him out again up in Scotland. I mean, what he's done is he's tried to recreate this eco-village, he calls it, although actually it's really an enormous housing estate with stone facing on the breeze blocks of the buildings that have been put put there, and there's certainly the architecture is quite interesting, but he's been trying to replicate up in Scotland what's going on in Dorchester, completely failed, and people are just not interested in buying these places, and so he's had to be bailed out.
I haven't really followed it. I think what he's done down south is an idea, a desire. I know if you look at the projects he supports, his products he sells in shops, his eco stuff that he's done with his High Grove, he's got water recycling systems and things like that. I think he's pushing things forwards. Occasionally he upsets somebody and they have a pop. I think he should be admired for what he's doing. He will one day be king. He'll have to be quiet.
What about this? What about this whole idea of keeping out of politics, though?
Well, Queen's done it very well, no question. He's sat there for many years, wanted to take control. I think he's rightly pushed some very good things
You
forward.
get the idea that he's not really that keen on it. When he did the Queen's speech this year, he was kind of sort of, well, this is a bit of a chore, But there's also, I mean, also he may also feel that that this is not, he wants to change things. He wants to make the head of state more political.
I think if you're stepping in as he is to the Queen's position, it must be stressful, it must be nervous. It's something he hasn't, it is a challenge.
He's had plenty of time to get ready for it, hasn't he?
Well, I don't know. Every time you do something the first time, he learns to do it properly. I think he's taking the steps carefully. I think he's going to be a good king. Simple as that. I think where there is comment about what he's said, sometimes he may have gone too far in terms of advising ministers and things like that. But we're humans. We make mistakes. And I think, give him a good chance.
The Guardian has been criticising Prince Charles for changing laws after they've been signed off by the House of Commons and the House of Lords in order to benefit his own personal estate.
I'm not going to comment on that.
Anyway, Martin, what do you make of Prince Charles's, it seems, inability up in Scotland as a property developer?
Well, I mean, historically, British monarchs have had very strong political views. And it's been a gradual process whereby they've been reduced to a more ceremonial role. But of course, we're not there yet.
It's a question of how public those views are, though, isn't it? I mean, obviously they will have views.
Well,
but
I would take the view that he's entitled to his views as long as they don't matter.